Hello, Alex Rees here with the Creative Learning Podcast, episode 11. And here's another one recorded way back before the pandemic even started. This one was January 2020. Oh dear. Yes, well, as I've said before, it's been that kind of year in terms of workloads and platefuls, hence the delay. And apologies to the interviewee for this episode, which was Richard Blacklaw-Jones, who was kind enough to come to Cardiff and meet me for the recording in the off-the-wall contemporary art gallery in Llandaff, who were kind enough to host the recording for us and give the recording a certain very pleasing room ambience, not to mention a little bit of background noise, which is nothing too intrusive, but really interesting to speak to Richard and find out about what he does. So he describes himself as a modern pop artist. He deliberately chooses to use the detritus of the civilization around him, specifically looking for man-made materials on beaches and the like, and removing those and using those materials to form art. He says this is making a fairly obvious environmental point. And I found it fascinating to look at Richard's art, but as we talked about it during this conversation, I really started to understand the depth of what it is that he does and some of the implications and how that maps out onto creative learning. And he has indeed worked with primary school children intermittently over the last 20 years. And I realised this is a perfect example of creative learning, what you can do with it. So he talks about rechanneling the embodied energy of found man-made crap, which is not a sentence I've said before. The benefits of restrictions and economy in being creative. The tyranny of choice comes up, responding to what you've got there and then in a creative sense, and the danger of having too many focuses. But yeah, I was really struck by the creative learning potential of his ways of working and how he's used that with kids. Very experiential, three-dimensional, tactile learning, covering lots of concepts and skills and topics all together in a very joined up way, and the kind of stuff that I think will really stay with children who work in this way and engage them with themes of environment and waste and all the rest of it in a very real way that will stick, I think. You'll see what I mean as we talk through it. So I know you haven't got all day, so let's get on with it, and I'll be back after the conversation with a bit of creative nuggetry. Enjoy. So, Richard, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
So how did you find your way to art in the first place, and then more specifically to pop art?
I'm of an age where I remember pop art, the first time around. Pop art had a sort of immediacy which old masters and other forms of art didn't have. But I wasn't really that interested in those days. My artistic training consists of a pottery O-level. I was fortunate that I had a school which had all sorts of facilities and a craft, which is what it was called, teacher who was sympathetic and interested, and I don't know, he could see something in me. So he said, do you want to do a pottery O-level? And I said, all right then. So I did, and I greatly enjoyed it. My family background is of, in effect, North Walian peasant stock. Not quite farm boys, but akin to. Mm-hmm. And the sort of family ethos was make, do and mend. So using what you had around you to create what you needed to have, that's just in my bones. And then it seemed a natural thing to me when confronted with mounds of man-made rubbish on a beach. I had lots of my kids and some cousins with me at the time, and they were all primary age, and I thought, rather than take them home and sort of play with sticking bits of macaroni onto paper and glitter and such, well, let's take some of this rubbish home with us and see what we can make out of that. And I became interested. They left it to Dad, and I made a picture out of what I found. And that was kind of the start of it. So I just kept going back to that same beach, and then I discovered some of the industrial history on that beach, explained what I was finding on that beach, amongst which there was a wide range of glass and colours of glass. And from a misspent youth, I knew that red glass was a rarity. Red glass used to be made with gold, so it was very, very costly. Consequently, it was only used for making things like perfume pots about the size of your little finger. So when I found fist-sized lumps of red glass on this beach, I was really, what is it? Eventually, a friend of mine pointed out that on one piece there was a sawtooth sort of shape. He said, that's part of a Fresnel lens, which is a particular shape of lens that would be used to cast light further. So they were parts of navigational lights on boats.
Right.
That particular beach was used as a boat breaking yard for decades in the 19th century. So there's just so much man-made stuff in that beach. Glass, various metals. That beach would count as one of the most heavily polluted that I've ever seen. And I come from Liverpool, So I've taken away from that beach over the years tons of scrap metal, lead, bronze, copper, and other assorted bits and bobs. And some of it's gone to the scrap man, some of it I've used, some of it I've got in sacks because it's history. It's that particular area's industrial past. And one way or another, I'll find a way of recognising the value inherent in those things that I found. So that use of what's around me was bred into me, and finding a way to use it has been trial and error since starting out sticking glass to glass and then working with metals and sticking them onto things, and then a few years ago having a sort of a proper light bulb moment, it dawning on me that I was a pop artist, and that recognition of that's where that's where I find myself. That kind of liberated me to continue using that wider range of materials instead of being restricted to glass or metals. Now I can use any old thing that I find because it's all man-made stuff and it's all repeating ad nauseam. This man-made crap should not be here. It represents embodied energy. We should place more value upon it, if only the value of it not being a pollutant. So all of my work is basically about that. Is about saying, look, see what's around you, think of a better way of doing stuff other than just tossing it away and letting it be a pollutant. It was a case of never having that much money, having to make do with what you had and being creative with what you had. So for me, that creativity came out in, as it were, DIYing and the ability to work with wood. I loved skip dipping. That was my form of beachcombing before I became a beachcomber. I lived in London. I used to run for recreation, and you'd pass skips everywhere, and they were so stuffed to the gunnels with valuable stuff that I couldn't resist going back, taking away whatever it was, great big 6-panel doors or old floorboards and reusing them, partly in doing out our own flat. But hardwoods, they're bloody costly, and you can't even find now. You can't buy really good quality mahogany. So the stuff that I found decades ago, you can't even buy it anymore. Mahogany is a protected species, and it's just not allowed to be, under very special circumstances, harvested and used. I found stuff that you can't get, so I kept it, and I would use it to make presents for family members or things that we needed, a corner cupboard or a bed, or that was where my creativity went. And it wasn't until we were living in Haverfordwest, we had kids, and that moment on the beach where I thought, oh, I wonder what we could do with this. And, one thing led to another.
Yeah. That teacher who you said spotted your predilections and encouraged you to do that O-level.
I'd love to be able to get back in touch with him. He might still be alive. He would probably be in his 70s now, 80s maybe. I'd love to be able to get back in touch with him and just to say, look, that little thing you did with me, it flowered many, many decades later.
Yeah.
But I'm sure what he did played its part.
Is your memory of him as a creatively responsive teacher as a positive force, or was it just an incidental thing?
Creatively responsive. I mean, he was interested. He had time. It was a different world, and that's, you've got to recognise that. The school I went to, it was a grammar school. They weren't under the same economic pressure as schools are nowadays. He had time, he had interest. The materials that we were using were there, provided by the school. There wasn't a cost. Well, you can't do that because it's too expensive. He was willing to indulge you with a bit of exploration. He could give you some guidance. He knew about stuff. There was stuff that the school kiln could do, and there was stuff the school kiln couldn't do. So, I was content within those restrictions. And I think restrictions of any sort force you to be creative within those restrictions.
Yeah. It's fascinating, though, isn't it, to think about how conscious are teachers of actions that they take, which to them might be a momentary thing, or a word, whether positive or negative, or a suggestion or an activity that has this massive downstream effect in someone's life. And
I've seen it only once in the work that I've done in schools. I belong to a group in Pembrokeshire called Art on the Faith Trail, which the name doesn't really explain us very well. There's no religious element to what we do. Nonetheless, we exhibit in St David's Cathedral as a group and individually in a various number of churches in Pembrokeshire. The aim being to get people to visit these places which are noteworthy in some sense. And maybe if they do a bit of walking in between, they'll do themselves some good. We did some outreach working with local schools, and like all local schools, they have challenged pupils, one of whom, unbeknownst to me, was a difficult pupil. He didn't seem at all difficult to me. He kind of took to what we were doing without any difficulties. He was engaged, he was doing stuff. The eventual pictures that were made by that particular class were gathered together to be considered by the bishop at the opening of the group exhibition in St David's Cathedral. The bishop chose this boy's work as the winner, and this was at a remove of a couple of months from when the work had been done and the presentation of the award and so on. And the boy's parents and the boy's teacher came along, and in conversation afterwards they were saying he just seemed to be transformed by that particular experience of working with you, using those materials. He's a different boy. He's not the difficult, challenging, obstreperous little git that he was. He's really, really keen on art. He's really engaged in doing that, and that's been wonderful. And he'd been a 9-year-old or something. 9-year-olds they're not quite plastic clay, but they're so much more responsive than adults. They're so much more easy to change than adults. And it wasn't that I set out to change him, but that change took place. That's the one time I've seen it. And I'm sure there will be teachers who will also have seen the effect of a lesson or a word or not word or, whatever. But teaching isn't my milieu, so I know it can happen. That's what I'm saying.
Well, it's interesting, speaking as I do to other creative practitioners and myself being one, there seem to be just thousands, maybe millions of these moments scattered out there, which most people say, oh, this one time, one kid, I just saw the light bulb go above his head, or whatever it may be, and it's always comes back to some form of creative engagement, which is fascinating, which is one of the reasons for this podcast, just to kind of pick amongst some of those examples and see what we can make out of it, Okay, so in terms of your own creative learning in school, was that like the highlight? Was that the main thing? How creative was school generally? Is there any memorable experiences aside from that?
Well, I went to a grammar school, and I was in grammar school in the 1960s, very early 70s. School must of necessity have been a creative place for me. School was a place where you rubbed along with other kids, and like most kids of my age, I was really, really keen on music. I started to play the drums. There were people who played guitars and such. But school, again, coming back to my family milieu, Welsh peasants didn't want their children to be peasants. They wanted them to have a better life. So it was all about get those certificates, go off and be a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, or something that meant you weren't having to be out in the fields in all weathers, or in the quarry, or down the coal mine, or any of those things that were the world that they had grown up in. And you're a kid, you do what your parents want. So most of my energies went into getting my certificates, preparing to go off to university. University was freedom. I could apply creativity to my life, out from under the parental thumb, and enjoy myself. You were allowed to do that in university in those days. Creativity began to appear in my life then because girlfriends and whatnot, they loved having something made for them. And I, having handled tools as a younger man, could pick up a bit of wood and make them something out of it. So, getting more interested in long-term relationships with girls, and the opportunity then, in effect, having a muse, someone to make something for. So making things, whether that be something practical like a breadboard or, a pair of earrings. It was, I loved doing that. So I kind of had a confidence in my abilities to wield tools, but I wouldn't ever have described myself as being particularly creative or artistic. They were means to an end, keep the girlfriend happy.
But from an outside perspective, many people would say that sounds tremendously creative, or everything you're describing there.
I guess it's the outside perspective because, looking back, I didn't mingle with particularly creative people, although the one girlfriend I am thinking of was a fabric and clothes designer. So I think she appreciated and encouraged me in making what I was making. Her bookshelf might have been of interest, I can't really remember now. But my own perspective of myself was, fairly limited. And as you get older, you begin to understand, looking back, there were pivotal moments, there were things that were important, which at the time you don't realise,
It kind of ties in with this whole idea, the Lead Creative School scheme, which has been all about promoting creativity in education and trying to increase the amount of creativity in education and addressing that sort of split view of creativity. A lot of people think they're not creative because they gave up piano and they can't paint and don't do the arts in whatever way, but this scheme is all about saying creativity inherently does belong to the arts, but also it can and does and should be across the rest of education and life in general, ways of being creative, thinking creatively, and operating creatively. So it just struck me that the way you described that, then it didn't sound as creative to you, but to me it really did. And I just seemed to chime in with that, and
For me, it was imagination.
Yeah.
It was seeing a nondescript bit of wood on a beach in Brighton and thinking, oh gosh, why is that wood purple? It turned out to be because the groins on Brighton Beach are made from a particular kind of wood. I think it was Andaman paddock, which was a hardwood and obviously chosen because of its durability in a marine environment. But bits of it got splintered off, and I picked up this thing and I was thinking, that's unusual. But being curious about it and being able to see, I could do something with that, and not being frightened of trying. I didn't think of it in terms of creativity at the time. It was just using what I had, because although I was independent financially of my parents, I wasn't by any means a wealthy person. So it was nice to look at what you saw in a shop and then go away and try and make a version of what you'd seen as opportunity and materials arose. In looking back, obviously it's creative, but it was the imagination to perceive possibilities and the confidence of one's abilities. I teach a lot of adults to do stuff, and I do the tools, because these days an awful lot of adults haven't got the grip strength to manoeuvre power tools safely, because it's just not in their world anymore. It's the world I was brought up in, and as a rower, I've got a grip you don't want to mess about with. But you meet people, you shake hands. It's unusual these days to meet a firm grip, because people don't live manual or physical lives anymore. My life has been that sort of a life. So growing up using tools in my work, in my leisure pursuits, and more latterly artistic career, it was always there. It was always a thing that I had to draw upon. If one wants to teach children, you've got to teach them, within the milieu of the modern world, and you've got to teach them safely. So you can't be letting them handle tools. However, you can be encouraging them to be imaginative and creative, and to see possibilities all around them. And you never know where that's going to go. It might turn out to be the birth of a new kind of software. It might turn out to be the birth of some whole new artistic movement. Who knows what the future holds?
It seems you're talking about the Lead Creative School scheme uses a particular conception of creativity and a philosophy called the creative habits of mind, where it's split into collaborativeness, persistence, discipline, imaginativeness, and you're mentioning some of the subheadings under all of these things, and it's one way of skinning it. It's just one model. But interesting that it's because I've been looking at it in this theoretical perspective for some time now, and you've kind of organically described it as something that seems to have just kind of naturally followed from your childhood. I
guess so, and it's particularly in the last 20 years, it's been an increasingly central aspect of my life, a pursuit. And two things that you mentioned there, the persistence, the sticking at doing something. You don't get good at doing something unless you do it a lot. And you can be self-directed in that, I want to master, I want to get to be good with this. And learning how to do it by trial and error. And having the wherewithal, a university education led me to understand how to seek out information. And these days, the internet makes it very easy. So if you find something on a beach, you're not sure what it is or how it can be used, the internet probably can supply your the knowledge that you need. Certainly part of what I've been doing in the last 20 years is trying to tell people this is what you can do with this particular kind of man-made crap that turns up on beaches. Here's what I did. You know, I'm sure you'll do something different. And that was always part of the courses that I did. Everybody would come up with a different idea, and I'd be sort of scratching my head thinking, why didn't I see that? You know? And it's lovely working with children because they always have new ways of thinking, and because they're so unformed by the world around them. You know, obviously they are. Relatively. But they're so much freer in their thinking, you know, so let them get on with it. And wow, look at that, you know.
This is a theme that comes up again and again, the surprising nature of kids' ideas.
But equally, to take what they're doing seriously, then that stick-at-itness has to be inculcated as well. And I'm not sure that the world we live in is one which encourages or emphasises that knowledge that persistence really pays. Practice does make perfect.
It doesn't seem to be a priority to headline that in that way, I don't think.
I'm not an educationalist, so and my experience in schools is intermittent. But, you know, see, as a father of four, as a grandparent of one, the world that we live in now doesn't seem to be as recognising of the value of just keep going with it, just keep practising, you know.
There are more competing kind of instincts going on, such as, you know, the X Factor culture of immediate success and
anathema. You know, it's like the expectation of being able to become an overnight success. I know it's possible. It's a real poison pill, that one.
And also the internet, there's a flip side there. I mean, on one sense, of course, it's an infinite resource of incredible information that if you were structured about your approach, you can use that in a persistent way, but also it's a form of instant gratification and
a massive distraction.
Distraction, of course, absolutely, which, again, is anathema to what we're talking about. So,
structure's another word, you know. It's an unpopular concept, I think, you know, of structuring being seen as, it's confining, it's limiting, and so on. Like I said earlier, you know, structure is confining, but confinement means creativity. It means finding ways. I grew up in a fairly conservative, with a small c, family background. You know, you didn't want to bring. If you were going to be naughty, don't get caught, because apart from anything, your dad would give you a thrashing, and you'd be, you know, stuck to the kitchen sink for the next 6 months in penance. So, if you were going to be naughty, it meant being creatively naughty, not getting caught. I don't know. That kind of is part of my background. Is the restriction of one's background were to be surmounted, and you had to deploy the resources you had in some way as to get round them. So from an artistic perspective, choosing to just use what I find was hitting several nails at once. I've always liked being economical. It's cheap. It doesn't cost anything. This is stuff that I can find and I can use. I see value in it where others don't. You know, I haven't got to spend money on my raw materials.
The restrictions thing is interesting, though. That comes up a lot in discussions around creativity, I think. Personally, I'm a music technologist. I use the software, I use computers, and the power to produce music today is so exponentially greater than obviously what, you know, early days, 70s, 80s, that some musicians do comment on the tyranny of too much choice.
Yeah, precisely.
Will consciously restrict, say, right, I'm going to only use a small section of the power and range that's available to me, and define some rules for this project where I can only use this kind of sound or whatever, you know, some other restriction to just get some focus and stop you procrastinating and deliberating and get on with it.
And using what you find is to see the possibilities in what you find, is to have the imagination to think, oh, look at that. That reminds me of such and such. The shape of it makes me think of that's immediately pushing you in a direction, or the colour of that reminds me of, or, you know, it happens sometimes you go out and you find all the elements of a picture. You'll find something that suggests a sky, for argument's sake, and then a few things that suggest objects or things or whatnots that can be foregrounded, and then something that will act as a background, and even sometimes a whole frame for that stuff. You go home and it's just a case of washing it, you know, cleaning it up, and then structuring it to sit together in the frame that you found. Lo and behold, you've got a picture. But you're responding to what you've got there and then, and that is my choice to just use what I find. I could put it all in a bag and keep it for months and months and months, and then go rooting in the bag, and I'd probably have 6 different things, and I might not be able to complete any of them because they're kind of pulling me in different directions.
You've got too many focuses.
Yeah. So for me, it's never been any kind of a hardship restricting myself. It has actually enabled, I feel, and I well understand the tyranny of too much choice. You know, it's like children who are offered, what do you want to eat? They don't know what to say, you know, unless it's give me a Mars bar or something, which, you know, you can't have a Mars bar. So it's much better to say, here's a banana sandwich, eat that, you know. Take away the element of, oh, I don't know what to choose. You know?
But even the same with, you know, choices of toys that kids are supplied with, you know, if they're beset with infinite amounts of impressive plastic, you know, this, that and the other, and of course, even worse, an iPad, it's not really, it doesn't increase creativity. I mean, I see that in my own daughter. Sometimes she's, you know, boredom is, I've often heard described as a very motivating factor for creativity. Like sometimes if she's bored, I'll say, well, you better find something to do then, hadn't you? And sure enough, she does, and, you know, will create.
From my own childhood, you know, one of the most potent anti-boredom things is the ability to read. Books are an enormous escape and avenue into other worlds. Other worlds expand your imaginative capacities, and once you can read, you can start to make up your own stories. So Pillaging Libraries was one of the great gifts of municipal Liverpool to its young people. I could go to the library, I could spend endless happy hours looking along the shelves, just seeing what's in this shelf, and taking things almost at random and going home and reading them and finding out about different aspects of whatever it was.
So tell me more about your own work with kids then. How did you kind of come into that? What have you learned over the years of working with kids, and further observations of childhood creativity?
If ever you get offered help, take the help. More than about 6 kids is overwhelming, especially when you're trying to, as it were, keep it safe. I like to have time to say, this is what I've done, show them, you know, crap-covered beaches, particular items of crap, and this is what I did with those items of crap. So a bit of time, as it were, doing a slideshow about that. I always take a sack full of rubbish, having, as it were, said beforehand, I'd love it if you and your school or group could go to wherever and find stuff which we will then use, but inevitably they never have enough, and a lot of them haven't done it. So I always take a big load along. So I view showing them the pictures as kind of a pump priming thing. Oh, look at that. Oh, yeah. Oh, we saw some of that, you know. And, oh, gosh, look, you know. Then we set about what are we going to do? Designing. Pencil and paper, my job is to disabuse the things that cannot be done in the time available. One boy wanted to make a snooker table. Sorry, we haven't got the materials, we haven't got the time. I don't know what to do. Oh, okay. Is anybody's birthday coming? Yeah, it's Mummy's birthday in 2 weeks' time. What's Mummy's favourite colour? Green. Okay. What green things can you think of? Well, leaves. Could we make a big leaf out of some green plastic? Oh, all right then. So all of a sudden, we've got something that fits into the child's life. It's Mummy's birthday. It's something that is in there in the sack. I know we've got some green plastic. Or it might be, their dad. What's Dad's favourite football team? Liverpool. Well, that's red. Okay, so we can do a red football then. Great, easy. We can do it in the time that we've got available. And that I don't know what to do has been circumvented with a few simple questions.
Colour seems to be, is that a main way in often? Or?
It's a simple way in. It's children understand what colour is. They know about favourites and, simple representational sort of things, flowers, tractors, boys and girls have different likes and dislikes. What's your favourite kind of car, for a boy or something like that. Boys often want to make swords and shields or guns and stuff like that. To a point you'll indulge them, and vice versa. Girlies are more soft and so on, and if they need help, I know from having done it lots and lots of times that this is a quick way through. If you've got the assistance of teacher and or LSAs, they often know things about the kids who are having difficulties, which can be used to prompt them into getting to grips with it, and then it's a case of, okay, well, we've got the materials here, have a route through. Is there something that's just the right shade that you want? Is there something in there that looks like what you want? And then it's my job they come to me and say, can you cut such and such a shape? Right, okay. So I'm, generally speaking, absolutely flat out cutting, scraping, shaping, making stuff which they then can use, gluing, cramping stuff in place. So the more help you've got, the more you can deal with the average size class, 20-ish, the certainty of a result which can then be hung on a wall. Often children will come up with 2 or 3 different ideas, and if they can do it, let them do it, Or sometimes they want to work together, so they'll make one bigger picture out with 3 of them rather than 3 smaller pictures. It's been in almost entirely what we've done has been 2-dimensional, because it's quicker and easier. If one wants to be 3D, then you need to have a bit more, instead of maybe 6 hours spread over 3 days, you need 3 days to be 3-dimensional, and a more a leisured approach,
right?
Because 3-dimensional, whilst I've done some 3-dimensional work, is still not quite terra incognita, but finding your way. Is this going to work? I'm not sure it will.
Yeah. So there's a balance to be struck to providing something that's achievable within a
precisely
time frame, isn't it?
The school wants results. You're there to produce an end result. So I go in and I know what I can do, and I know what I can do within a certain amount of time. I know what I can do. It's for me to introduce, to make sure that the teachers whom I'm dealing with understand that and don't have unrealistic expectations, which some do.
Right.
They think you're going to be able to do something for everybody in 2 hours. It's not going to happen.
So do you get a range of teacher responses to the way you work and this creative input that you're providing? As you said, some assume perhaps a little too much? Maybe some get it more than others. Does it fit well into the school life?
I think the thing I can say pretty much 100% is that the teachers all end up with their eyebrows raised.
Right.
It's as much of a illuminative experience for the teachers as for the children. The children are being brought up with the idea of environmental protection and not polluting and not wasting and littering. But the adults, generally speaking, haven't really paid much attention to it, which is why we live in such a crap-strewn world. So for the teachers, it's quite instructive and eye-opening. It almost entirely, they are going to say to me, oh wow, we never sort of realised, and that's really interesting, and oh, I'm going to be doing things differently myself in future. Because they see the children almost universally being engaged willingly in what's, they're dead keen. This is something they've been taught about, and now it's a chance to put it into practice. And they're quite pleased to have that opportunity and that freedom of expression, because I'm not saying to them, you can only do this. You can do what you like with it. Yeah. Fill your boots, kids. If you want to try and make a dinosaur, I'll give you every bit of help, but it's going to fit onto that board that we've made. But the range of stuff that they come up with is always endlessly surprising.
But it seems like a lovely way of learning, as you said, about that topic of the environment and the waste and all that in a physical way. Yeah. That maybe embeds it more.
There's the old idea of 3 different modes of learning, isn't there? There's, learning by reading, learning by observation, learning by doing. Well, here we are, we're learning by doing. You've already been taught about this. You will have seen the TV programmes, you will have heard Mr. Attenborough telling us, how the world's oceans are being polluted. Well, here is a practical thing that you can do about it. And these days, so many people are doing that. Not to blow one's own trumpet, but I was on Marlow Beach in Pembrokeshire earlier this year with Coast and Country, the ITV TV programme, doing a programme which incorporated me talking about practical action, going out, picking up stuff, doing something with it. And I was saying more and more people are picking stuff up and putting it in the bin. So I'm perfectly happy to be deprived of materials because the beach is a bit cleaner, and that's fundamentally what I've always been about. And lo and behold, a family came past, armfuls of rubbish. So they stopped and were part of that impromptu TV interview, and I actually had that top picture over there in my pocket, my bag. Right. So I took that out and said, look, this is what I've made out of crap off the beach. Take some of what you got there home, make a picture. Ooh, we never thought of that. Children can be, whether it's they've got a beach at hand, children can be the catalyst in the family. They, can take a bag to a beach. Let's pick up some rubbish, mummy. Let's do a 5-minute litter pick. Schools can be part of an urban sort of, let's take care of our environment. Let's do a 5-minute litter pick within a few hundred yards of the school. And if you pick up stuff that can be used, let's put it to one side. Let's use it. Tin cans, they're a perfectly good resource for artistic endeavour. Old straws, there's just so much stuff out there. Rather than just stick it in a bin, which is the proper and responsible method of dealing with it, do something with it first, get a picture that the child can take home and say, hey, mummy, look, They've done something based upon what they've been taught. They've cleaned their environment up. They've used some of that materials. They deployed their creativity. And as having done that, they've got that greater sense of agency. I can do something in my environment to help my environment and myself.
Yeah, there's something lovely about transforming something that was worthless into something that is artistic.
I grew up in a world of lip service where littering was a bad thing, but everybody littered. And that's why The beaches when I started were just thick in crap, because if people even noticed it, it was that they would wring their hands and say, isn't it terrible, somebody should do something about it. Lip service, not doing something about it, saying littering's bad, but living in a world in which littering was acceptable. Littering is becoming increasingly unacceptable, and beaches are, I'm very happy to say, in Pembrokeshire at least, the subject of almost, from my point of view, too much cleaning. I can't find stuff anymore. I have to go to difficult to access places off the shooting range, a beach that I can climb down into. I can find stuff there, but going to Newgale Beach, not even worth the bother anymore, because it's just so intensively kept clean by the people that visit it. Lovely, fantastic, long may it continue. By the way, have a look about in your urban environment. I can take you from here, across the road, into a car park where I parked, and in that car park there is lying on the ground half of a picture. On your walk to and from school, you will walk past several pictures worth of rubbish every day. Every day. Have your eyes open, see what is around you, and let's start applying that burgeoning environmental consciousness. And if you choose to use it for artistic purposes, wonderful. Exercise your creativity. But look around you, notice. That's the first thing. Artists notice.
Sure. And maybe some of those kids would notice as well, as you say, after having gone through that experience.
Because that's been a reinforcing thing for them. It's not just lip service anymore. It's actually...
You've felt it, you've worked with it, you've made something of it, and now you'll notice.
We went out and picked it up, hopefully, and whether they did that with the school or by badgering their parents. Hopefully their parents will be thinking about this as well, But in an ideal world, what a good basis that would be for part of a sincere environmental education in schools, which they do cover, of course, but to do it in that way, again, it's the physical, it's the tactile, it's the different ways of learning, and it's a more embedded experience, I think. Do you have particular sort of habits or approaches to get into your creative zone, into your creative space of mind? How do you inspire yourself? How do you get creative? Just keeping my eyes open. Like I said, I walked, 2-3 minutes from where I parked the car across to here where we are in Cardiff doing our interview, and I saw half the makings of a picture. In a way, it's more a matter of turning it off. I'm so used to, because I go out looking for materials, my brain is wired that way. And I think that harks back to something that is deeply embedded in all of humanity. It's the hunter-gatherer experience. When I went out with my granny for a walk, my granny would say, let's take a bottle with us, by which she meant a jar or a bag, because she would be looking at the hedges for, those rose hips, I can use them to make some medicine. Oh, look, there's a plum tree. We can get the fruit from that, make some jam. Oh, look, there's some whatever. That was economic necessity for them. Use what they had around them.
We're coming towards the end, Richard. I wanted to just ask, do you have any further thoughts on the role of creativity beyond the arts in education, in life, beyond what we've already talked about?
We're in a constrained situation. We are pushing up against the limits of our circumstances as a planet and as a species, and creativity is inevitably going to be part of learning our way out of the situation that we've made for ourselves. Somebody out there is tinkering with ideas of making batteries that, sweep aside our current battery situation. With better batteries, we've got the possibility of using more of the renewables that we generate, finding ways to be more creative with our waste streams. That's one of the bloody marvels of the world, is that we generate so much waste. We are running up against limits in terms of materials that we need, so-called strategic minerals, for instance. Well, I can tell you where there are vast amounts of strategic minerals to be had. Old Victorian dumps are full of strategic minerals because the metals that they used were so impure compared to what we use nowadays. Those whole dumps have probably got more value in them than some of the low-grade ore bodies that are being worked on the basis of we'll get a gram of whatever it is we're looking for per ton or more of rock that we move. You know, that kind of working isn't sustainable. Looking around and thinking in different ways is being creative. And we're in a situation where we have to get very creative very quickly, because otherwise we'll be underwater, we'll be on fire, we'll be dead.
Yeah. Okay. Final question. If you could make a phone call back in time to the 20-year-old Richard, what one piece of advice would you give? Richard, I'd like to thank you for being on the podcast. It's been very interesting listening to you talk about your experiences with creativity and the whole idea of being more tuned into our surroundings and using that as a way of creative learning and creative thinking, especially for young people. I think will be very interesting for people to listen to. Where can we find you online?
I have a Facebook page.
Okay.
Beachcombing, one word, art. And I have an Instagram, which is Richard Blacklaw-Jones. There is a website, but it's not quite moribund, but I haven't done anything with it now for a long time. But if you want to see what I was up to in previous years, Beachcombing Art, all one word, as a website.
Yep.
That's got an archive of stuff I did a long time ago.
Okay.
And you can see where I'm coming from. But
yep. Great. Thank you again for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. And it's been a pleasure talking to you. Sorry about all the coughing and spluttering.
I'll chop a few of those out. Awesome. Thanks again, Richard, and apologies again for the delay in getting this one out. Big thanks to the Off the Wall Art Gallery for hosting the recording. I highly recommend a visit there. It's a lovely little place, and you can see Richard's art there. You can also see Richard's art on their website, which I will link to, and of course Richard's links. I'll put all that in the show notes so you can check it all out. All right, Creative Nugget time. So this is a book called The Mysteries of Harris Burdick by Chris van Alsberg. I'm particularly thinking if you're doing any kind of work with kids and you want to get the imagination going, could be creative writing, drama, art, or anything, but it's a beautiful series of black and white, very detailed pencil drawings depicting a rather strange, unusual scene in each case. Some of them quite creepy, and you could just use those images as a starting point, but also each one is accompanied by a title and a caption, which you could either use those on their own or in conjunction with the picture, or do whatever you want with them. But it's hard to describe, really. Just buy it. It's only £6. But like there's one title called A Strange Day in July. The caption is, "He threw with all his might, but the third stone came skipping back." And Mr. Linden's library, he had warned her about the book. Now it was too late. And it's a very strange, dreamlike picture to accompany each one. I don't know. I think it's really interesting, and you could do so much with it, or just have it as a nice book. Anyway, all right, there we go. Next episode coming up very soon, I promise. Thanks, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well and enjoying things opening back up. And fingers crossed, eh? See you soon. Bye-bye.